All right, guys, only 3 games left this year. We do have a 2-game conference championship slate, and I would be remiss if we didn't fire up a stream, talk through some of the plays. And to do so, had to get my guy, Lord Reebs, aka Rich Rebar. Haven't done a show with him on these airwaves in a while. Wanted to get my hand in the dirt with him, talk about all the interesting kind of ramifications with this Mahomes injury, what he's seeing with these matchups, all of that good stuff. We're going to break it down now here on the channel.
I suffer from a debilitating condition known as atropic shockitis.
Peter's one of the greatest depositors I've ever seen.
Trust the process. Let's go. Let's go.
I got auto matched with Levitan. This is bullshit.
If I just go the other way, in that 66, I win all the money. All the money.
If I had 150 lineups, I'd win too.
Process over results.
Illuminati make a bitch go crazy. I don't know which one of these my baby. Bust down AP, 35 bullets in your head like KD. Bust it, bitch go bust it. And I had 10 pints with me in Russia.
Hey everyone.
Lord Reebs, Rich Rebar, how we doing here?
It's good, man. I always forget about that intro. It's so good, especially with you turning your chair around and coming in right as you come on as it ends. It's so good, man.
Yeah, normally in my head, I'm like, I need to update these videos. I want to keep them fresh, and people seem to like that one so much that I'm like, what's crazy is that the jokes in that hold up decently well. Although there are so many new DFS terms that I probably could refresh it if I wanted to.
I've been fortunate to hang out with you and your wife in person, and asking her about filming you, and all of these things, and getting you to come out of the trash can and all these things. Like, what are you doing, man? What are we really doing here?
I will say, here's the thing. The trash can bit, I did not involve her in at all because she would not have signed off on that. That was a tripod. Most of the stuff is tripod. Basically, it's on the scale of how embarrassing is this to ask Lauren to film. And these days, normally it's so embarrassing that I just don't even bother. I just make it happen on my own.
Yeah, we appreciate your dedication to the grind, though, for sure. One of the most dedicated individuals in this space.
I know. I need to start carving out time to make more videos like that. I did update the Best Ball Bros video this summer. That one felt good. But now that we hit the off season, a little more time, maybe we can get some more videos out there. Shout out to everyone in the chat hanging out with us today. Rich, how is your season gone for you over at Sharp Football? Are you sad that we're down to 3 games? Are you excited for the break? Where's your mental headspace at?
I mean, a little bit of all of the above. I think a lot of people, coming into this year, it was more of a mixed bag of analysis coming into the year. A lot of gutters and strikes. I think that was the case for everyone. It was a down scoring year for the NFL. It was something I thought might happen too, coming out of the impact of the pandemic the last 2 years and not really understanding how much, was impacted by the pandemic, right? We went through 2 years of the NFL. We will never have 2 years like that again. That, where there was a whole year where there was no home field advantage, there was goofy referee stuff, all these different elements, guys going on the COVID list. We didn't have to deal with any of that this year. Definitely was an impact there. But then, as the course of the season goes on, I mean, you always, when I do something like the worksheet, always just pick up steam as we go, as the information comes in, and ended up closing the season amazing. I had amazing December and January. Really bummed we're down to these condensed showdown slates. We're just down to the 2, where Quez Watkins is going to be 12%, owned this weekend. It's kind of a bummer, and you need more goofy stuff to happen. But I'm excited for the games. I think we are down to what I believe are the 2 best teams in each conference, which I don't think we get a lot of years, and I do think it happened this year.
Yeah, the 2 or the 4 best?
I think the 2 best teams in each conference. I think you can argue if the Bills are a top 4 team in the NFL, but I do think the Bengals and Chiefs are the 2 best teams in the AFC, especially as the close in the season, and the 49ers and Eagles were the 2 best NFC teams for us to get.
Yeah, and it's been wild too. I don't know if you did any of the playoff drafts, but just the dynamic with the Chiefs and the Eagles having the buys and then going and look through the teams. I mean, it was really, really hard to get Chiefs teams through, especially just because Mahomes had a dud last week, more or less. And so we are headed towards some weird scenarios in these underdog playoff contests where if it is a Chiefs-Eagles Super Bowl, you're not going to see many teams even able to field an entire roster.
Yeah, and all the tournaments like the FFPC and stuff, like you had to did you get that DK Metcalf 30 burger, right?
Right.
Like in the first week, like because that's going to carry so much weight to even through the Super Bowl run. And there's a lot of people that had Josh Allen stacks no longer in the field. It's did you get kind of lucky those big games? And we'll have a couple of big games left, I think, from some of these guys.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I feel like the big talking point this week, I've been talking about it on the radio this week, is like this whole Mahomes ankle thing. And we've seen the line almost like ping pong back and forth based on the news. It looks like the Chiefs are back to being like 1.5 point consensus favorites. And most people I've talked to have said that they thought the Chiefs would be like 3-point favorites if Mahomes was fully healthy. So where are you at on this ankle? How much are you like baking it into how you think this game is actually going to go? Or is it a total non-story at this point?
No, I think it's the fact that he's practicing in full is a big deal. And this is the rare double Wong both direction teaser. Like we never get a scenario like this where the Bengals opened at +2.5 and you could move them through 3 and 7. And then at one point the Chiefs were getting 2.5 and you could tease them 6 and go through 3 and 7. Like we rarely ever get something like that ever happen. So there's probably a lot of double Wongers out there. And, if you're going to do one Wong, you might as well double Wong it.
There you go. The rare double Wong. You got to take advantage of it. So where are you falling on initially in the week when coming off of this high ankle and you're looking 4 to 6 weeks and you're kind of watching how limited he was, I was like, this is going to affect him on a bunch of plays.
Yeah.
I'm at the point where I'm like, I feel like this is still going to affect him on some plays, but maybe it's only a handful of plays now that this is affecting him. Like, where are you at on that sliding scale of how much this matters?
Well, it definitely matters because you look at the 3 times these teams have played. Mahomes has basically been more of a floor play. He's been outscored by Burrow in all 3 games. His high score is 20.9 fantasy points. In standard, you get a little bonus, on DK on a couple other sites to get you an extra 3 points. But he's really just kind of lived at that 20-point mark in all 3 games. And when these teams played in week 13, he only had 12.9 passing points. He had a rushing touchdown in that game. We really can't count on that. You look at the Bengals, they allowed a season low. They were number 1 in the NFL in completion rate allowed. They just held Josh Allen under 60% completion rate. And these teams played in week 13. Mahomes he completed just 59.3% of his passes. He had just 4 games this season where he completed fewer than 60% of his passes. So there is some kind of even though the Bengals didn't play a lot of really good quarterbacks, they still did limit Mahomes on the sample, and they did limit a guy like Josh Allen on the sample. And what Anarumo has really done a good job in this matchup is the Bengals don't really give the Chiefs one thing. They do a lot of things where you have a good defense and they're good at one component. The Bengals adjust and they throw a lot of things at the wall. And these 3 matchups, they have not played any single coverage against Patrick Mahomes 20% or more of the time. And they've really, like a lot of teams, reduced a lot of their single high safety stuff, but they've just given the Chiefs a lot to look at. And, the Lou Anarumo Bengals stuff that we've historically seen the last couple of years since he's been there has been the after halftime adjustments. And that's held true in these Chiefs games. The Chiefs have scored 19 second half points in 3 matchups against the Bengals. So, I mean, it is one of these things where if he's not going to be able to kind of run around, because you're going to see some drop 8 stuff from the Bengals. They've done it in the last 2 matchups. They've faced the Chiefs. And if Mahomes isn't going to be able to go off script and he's going to have to hold the ball a little bit and not be able to use his legs, that is an advantage here. We just don't know how detrimental it'll be, because when you look at Mahomes last week still too, of all quarterbacks that play in the divisional round, he led all quarterbacks in EPA per play in the second half of that game against the Jaguars and passer rating in the second half of that game against the Jaguars. He is still really good at just playing regular quarterback. So, yeah. I mean, he still is. He's the best player in football. They still have him. It's tough to really understand what the ramifications fully will be, because he was still so damn good just being a regular quarterback.
For sure. And how are you thinking about him? I'll pull up here, just benchmarking him against some of these other quarterbacks this week from a DFS perspective. It's a weird thing with the pricing this week where he is the most expensive. So he's not going to project as a good points per dollar play. I have him here as the 4th, best points per dollar play relative to the ceiling. The ownership, though, does look like it's going to be discounted. Yeah. Maybe this creeps up now that he's been getting all of these positive reports today. Andy Reid saying he's a full go. But I'm kind of curious, just from a pure raw perspective, Burrow versus Mahomes now seems very close.
I honestly thought Burrow is the best play of the 4-game slate anyways. I mean, he's already had 2 30-point games in this matchup. And he's been so awesome against the Chiefs. And so last week, I never really bought the narrative that like it was going to be like a huge issue, the offensive line, right? Because structurally the Bengals and how teams have approached playing the Bengals with so much too high stuff is they really kind of calibrated throughout the course of the season of just the quick pass game. I mean, Burrow was second in the NFL in getting rid of the football out of his, just getting rid of the football. And we saw that, in week one, he was second among all quarterbacks and, time to throw. You saw that in the game plan. Everything's been shallow. Since week 9, Burrow's 29th in the NFL in deep target rate. Like this has been something they've already adjusted to. And I think that's something we'll see continue to happen this week. And you look at teams like the Chiefs, like no one's more sensitive to pressuring the quarterback than the Kansas City Chiefs are. When they pressure the opposing quarterback, they've allowed a 42% completion rate. That's 6th in the NFL. And they've allowed 3.6 yards per pass attempt. That's number 1 in the NFL. But when they haven't pressured the quarterback, they've allowed a 75% completion rate. That's a league high. They've allowed 7.8 yards per pass attempt. That's 24th. A 5.5% touchdown rate. That's 30th. And they only pressured Joe Burrow 22% of the time in week 13. The Chiefs only pressured one quarterback at a lower rate this season. It was Tom Brady. And in the past 3 matchups these teams have played, remember, they've only sacked Burrow once in each of the past 2. And when they haven't pressured Burrow at all in these 3 matchups, he's completed 75% of his passes, 9.1 yards per pass attempt, 7 touchdowns, 1 interception. He got to get home. They have to get home to him.
Yeah.
And can they get home if he's getting rid of the ball that damn fast? That's kind of like what's in the air for the Chiefs. They have to be able to get pressure on Joe Burrow.
Yeah. And, just thinking like that, those thoughts and just the way the pricing is setting up this week. I mean, Burrow and Bengals players especially are going to be very popular. It's very easy to get, Jamar Chase in. You can play T. Higgins at 5,400. Joe Mixon has a palatable price tag at 6,500. I assume kind of these Bengals onslaughts where you have basically Burrow, Mixon, Chase, another one of the ancillary pass catchers. That is probably going to be the most common lineup I think you'll see out there.
And the fact this is the late game, right? Like if this game's if this is the 3:00 game, you might see some more, strategic kind of play of this game because we get the early reveal first. But the fact that this is the late swap game too, I mean, it's just going to boost up. It's the highest total between the 2 games. It's the late game. So like you're going to see a lot of just ownership naturally pushed to this game inherently. The only thing you can hope is if maybe you get the Galaxy brain Mahomes thing, right? Where like people like say like, well, Mahomes, I'm going to play Mahomes if he's going to be like 25% owned, right? Like, but then maybe if everyone does that, it pushes it to like 25-30%.
Right. And I guess what is interesting about it is if you just look at pure optimals, it's actually Hurts that's showing up in there just because his ceiling is bigger projection wise than Burrow. But then you are seeing Mixon, Chase, Higgins, Hayden Hurst, and Bengals D are all showing up in ceiling optimals. So, and I assume if you're rolling out that many Bengals, you're probably just tossing Burrow in with it as well.
Right. I mean, if you're going to play that many pass catchers, the only way you would probably go against it is unless you go full onslaught and you're just trying to encapsulate all the touchdowns if you do Mixon. But the other pivot would just to be play Mixon, right? And you hope that you soak up either a receiving touchdown or you get the rushing touchdowns. But it's really hard to, I think, move away from the Bengals. Burrow's price definitely doesn't help things out either, right? Like the way he's priced compared to the other guys, he probably should be a few hundred dollars more.
Right. And on the flip side, we have the same dynamic we've had with this Chiefs teams all year, which is you feel good about Mahomes, you feel good about Kelsey, and then you're throwing your hands up in the air. I mean, both Pacheco and McKinnon, like McKinnon goose egg last week, didn't get targeted, which was weird. You have Mecole Hardman coming back, Kadarius Toney like an efficiency all-star, but never commanding volume. Juju just like deciding which games he wants to show up. So it doesn't feel good to overstack the Chiefs, even if you like their side.
Yeah, this has been so the Chiefs have been a stacking problem the entire season because the most popular way to stack it, the most comfortable way to stack it is Mahomes and Kelsey, and that's so expensive it's hard to stack. You get a little bit of alleviation this week because the player pool is just so condensed and everyone's going to be playing some goofballs anyways. So you can try to just jam Kelsey in more than you could a typical slate. But you look at the rest of these ancillary jamokes and like, what are we really getting out of these guys? So the Chiefs are one of just 2 teams that target their receivers fewer than 50% of the time. Only the Ravens have targeted their wide receivers less. And granted, both those teams have an elite tight end to soak up targets and funnel targets to, but the Chiefs haven't had a 100-yard wide receiver since week 7. Over their past 11 games, all of their wide receivers have combined for 7 touchdowns. Like there's just no ceiling. Juju has 3 or fewer catches in 7 of his past 9 games. Marcus Valdes-Scantling and Justin Watson are like huge cardio guys, and they're playing like the second and third most snaps. You just hope that you luck box into either a big play or a touchdown from those guys. Tony only ran 12 pass routes last week, but at least when he's in the game, they're using him. Right. We don't know if Hardman's going to play and kind of carve into any of that because, Tony, 40% of his targets are behind the line of scrimmage. It's just really hard to one onslaught with the Chiefs or even stack them. And no matter what, it feels like one of these guys will decide the slate. But from a top-down perspective, like, how do you even pick one of these guys? Like, what's the process?
I have no clue. And I do think, like, if you are onslaughting them, right, you do Mahomes, one of the running backs, Kelsey, and then you have to just put all these names in a hat and pull one of Tony, Hardman, Juju, MVS, Watson out.
Yeah, I mean, you could try to do like some game theory play and say like, well, because of Tony's price, he'll be like, he'll be rostered to a good amount, probably the most actually. Looking at projected ownership, I think he will be the most popular Chief. And you look at say like a guy like Tyler Boyd, who's essentially the same price on DraftKings as Kadarius Toney, right? Yeah, it's just an inherent pivot to get away from. And maybe you just do like a Tyler Boyd and you take a guy who's actually going to be on the field the whole game at the same price versus, the more popular play in Tony, and you go that route. And maybe you just play like a Juju or MVS just because they'll be lower owned than the Chiefs. If you're building Mahomes stack, that is in this scenario, like maybe that's the way is you just get away from the most popular guy and you just hope to luck box into that touchdown.
I do think that definitely makes sense. And you could see if you guys are watching the video version of this, I have pulled up on screen just my chart with wide receiver. And the last column is the sim. So I take the run the sims optimal rate, and then I subtract it by the ownership just to see who's standing out. And Rich's point on Tyler Boyd is popping here, where you're seeing his ownership at 19%. He has a sim rate of 29%. Looks like one of the better wide receiver plays relative to ownership. And then you see Kadarius Toney more of a neutral sim rate relative to his ownership. So I do think that's a interesting call out. And then the other interesting one is Juju is the guy with the second most sim differential, appearing in 35% of these sims, 29% ownership. I mean, still, small margins here, but worth noting that maybe Juju is popping a little more than the field wants to give him credit for.
Yeah, and then these small slates, like those little micro edges might be enough, right? And obviously, if you're playing in large field stuff this weekend, you're going to have to do something goofy, right? Something goofy is going to take down the large field stuff. But if you're in smaller field stuff, you could definitely give away a spot and still be really good, and run out. So it depends kind of what you're playing. But definitely if you're in large field stuff, like you're going to have to really run hot on something weird.
Yeah. And that's the thing too of like, this is why I'm kind of, and he's obviously not in here yet because most sites haven't started to project Hardman in, even though I do think he's going to play. But Hardman's on us, I'd say Tony has earned targets at a high rate, but Hardman to me, like pound for pound, has been like the most impressive non-Kelsey pass catcher in the offense. Does that track for you?
I mean, it's interesting because the Chiefs have had like this weird touchdown baton that they've like handed off to people. Like, remember the year opened with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, like actually like scoring a touchdown every week. And he was like the RB2 at like one point in fantasy football. And people were like, do we trade? Do we sell him? Can he sustain this? Well, he's on the Chiefs. Like they're going to get, and then he handed it off to Mecole Hardman. And Mecole Hardman got like all this usage in the red zone. He wasn't getting a lot of targets per week, but he would always come in the red zone. He'd get those jet sweep pop passes, those they're Mahomes touchdown passes, but they're like, behind the line of scrimmage. And then when he got hurt, that's right when McKinnon took off. Like when McKinnon took immediately off when Hardman got hurt, and it was the same stuff, right? Like he can't keep getting away with this De'Aaron Paul meme. He's got 6 touches, but he scored a touchdool in 6 straight games. Like, and so who gets the baton now, right? Like who has it for the playoffs? Like it kind of was back to Kelsey last week. We'll see kind of how it ends. It's hard for me to envision though, like if Hardman plays because he's been out for so long. And they've kind of gone back and forth. Like he looked like he was going to come back like 2 or 3 weeks ago and then got hurt again during practice and didn't come back. Like even if he plays, is it more just like where he's a thorn to everybody else instead of like having like a huge snap count himself? Again, it's just another element to add to this goofy, like trying to figure out because they play all these guys.
Yeah. Yeah. And on the flip side there, and I do want to talk about the Chiefs running backs, but while we're here at wide receiver, we talked about Boyd for a second. Higgins is like the really interesting one to me because recently we have seen Jamar Chase almost separate as the clear alpha target earner in here. If you look at basically Higgins' target share the past 3 or so weeks, it's been in line with what Hayden Hurst and Tyler Boyd have commanding. Do you think, is that small sample size noise, or do you think this is actually a shift in the Bengals prioritizing Chase more in the offense than they did earlier?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit both. I wouldn't be surprised too if like there's just something underlying with Higgins, like maybe he's not fully like he's just not as healthy as like we may assume. I mean, obviously he's gone through a number of things this season, but his splits since Chase came back in Week 13 are just so night and day different than prior to when he played with Chase. And I'm not even talking about what he did while Chase was out, but since Chase has come back in Week 13, he has 31.5% of the team targets. The next closest Bengal is at 15.4%. So he's that's wild. He has 40.6% of the team air yards. The next closest Bengal is at 22.9%. He's been targeted on 28% of his routes. The next closest Bengals at 20.6. That's actually Hayden Hurst, which is wild to think about when you have a player like T. Higgins on the field. And as a byproduct, T. Higgins has now gone 6 of his past 7 games with fewer than 40 receiving yards. Like he's too good of a player to have lines like that. And since Chase came back, I mean, he's been targeted on just 15.5% of his routes with him and Chase on the field together. Prior to that, he was targeted on 20.2% of his routes when he and Chase were on the field together. He's over a full yard per out run difference when he and Chase play together. I feel like there has to be just more to the story that we just aren't privy to the information on, other than just saying, well, let's get Chase a bunch of targets, because if I ran the team, I'd want to get Chase as many targets as I could too. But it really has impacted the ancillary guys for the Bengals. Boyd has only hit 60 yards, and he has one touchdown in his past 10 games, 60 yards in one game since Week 7. That was the Chiefs game though. And the Chiefs are really rough against interior wide receivers. We saw Christian Kirk last week was the second highest scoring wide receiver on the slate. He did have 4 catches for 60 yards and a massively dropped touchdown against the Chiefs earlier in the year. Tyler Boyd did. So I do like him. Higgins is going to be a wild card though, right? Because we know like if he hits, there's still like a ceiling. Because as part of that sample we talked about, he had an 8 for 128 and a touchdown in that sample. Like Higgins is probably, or Boyd, I mean, is probably like a real good floor play. And if you get a touchdown, he can be a really solid play. But the odds that like Boyd can get you like 25 to 30 are probably very thin. Where like Higgins, like at least we know, even with the variance, like there's still an outcome where Higgins has like a 30-point game.
Do you think, is there any hand in the dirt stuff about, I mean, Jamar Chase has just crushed the Chiefs these past 2 years. I mean, everyone remembers the Week 17 explosion game last year. Is there anything the Chiefs can do to try to bracket him, double coverage, and just say, hey, let's make maybe an injured T. Higgins or whatever beat us? Or is Chase just so good he's inevitable?
I mean, they definitely can roll coverage to him and try to help. But I mean, this is the thing that the Bengals put you in a box, is those other guys are so good, right? And Joe Burrow is so good at, recognizing everything pre-snap. I mean, there arguably may not be a better quarterback pre-snap than Joe Burrow. And the Chiefs have been so bad against opposing wide receiver ones the entire year. Like, they're 31st in the league in points allowed per game to wide receiver one targets. They've allowed the most touchdowns to opposing wide receiver ones. And like, these are guys like you inherently game plan for them during the week, right? Like, right. Coming in, like last week, they know coming in, like who are the Jaguars trying to get the football to, right? Like Christian Kirk's a priority, and Christian Kirk was, if he's able to pull in that bomb that Trevor Lawrence, they weren't able to connect on, he's a massive game. And they've known Chase as the guy in these games, and he still has really solid lines. So it's really tough. I think when you have those other guys on the field, it's really hard, other than what we've seen from some of these other guys in these playoffs. Like you saw Stephon Diggs, right? Like, could the other Bills step up? And that ended up being a problem. The Cowboys, right? Like, did anyone step up outside of CeeDee Lamb last week? And I do wonder if that's going to happen to the Chiefs, right? Because the narrative all week was like, well, the Cowboys just need to get more weapons. Josh Allen just needs to get more weapons. If there hasn't been the Tyreek Hill trade has not come up all season long, really, because Mahomes led the league in passing yards and touchdowns. But this is a game where if the Chiefs do lose, and it's another game where like Lou Anarumo and the Bengals can game plan around just limiting Travis Kelce, because Travis Kelce's going to have something in this game. But if Travis Kelce has like 6 for 65 or like 7 for 80, like the Bengals will be thrilled by that. And if none of these other Chiefs guys step up, they combined for 6 catches, the wide receivers, the first time these teams played. Like, we're going to have the same narrative, right? Coming into Monday. It's like, well, the Chiefs, man, they really could have used Tyreek Hill in that game, right?
Yeah. Their GM going and saying, what, you want us to suck and bottom out so we can get Jamar Chase 5th overall? um, let's talk a little bit about the Chiefs running backs, and then we can start to pivot to this Eagles-Niners game. I'm curious your thoughts on this McKinnon and Pacheco thing. When I went to pull up ownership projections, I just assumed that Pacheco was going to be more popular. He looked good last week, running well. McKinnon had the goose egg there with no targets. And yet I pull this up and I'm like, holy cow, 42% projected ownership. McKinnon, Pacheco down here at 21. I almost want to say that feels off to me, but if that's the case, like I feel like I have to play Pacheco. But what are you thinking about from just like an X's and O's standpoint? Who's going to be utilized more here?
Well, I think that when you saw in the second half of that game when Mahomes was hurt, like they went to McKinnon for pass protection. He even out carried. Remember, this is a game that the Chiefs led at halftime and led the entire second half.
Yeah.
He even had more rushing attempts than Pacheco in the second half. And they just trust him a lot more if you're going to have like more of a quick game, right? Like, so say like Mahomes' ankle thing is a bigger deal and it is like to the fullest. They're probably going to have to play McKinnon a lot more because he's the foxhole guy. They trust his pass protection. They trust him as a pass catcher. So I would say that like people are like more, the field's too sharp on that stuff, right? Like they watched the game last week. They saw what happened. Pacheco hardly played a second half game. And especially because you would say we're up, Mahomes is hurt. Let's just hand the ball off a bunch, right? And get the hell out of here. And that didn't happen with Pacheco. And so if he doesn't have that type of run out in that scenario, that kind of steers that ownership. But we do know what we have in Pacheco, right? From a fantasy stance, like he's a guy that is going to need to be like hyper efficient as a runner or have a big run like he had last week because he's not going to catch passes and he's not going to have many scoring opportunities because that's just kind of our type of running back he is. On a small slate, though, where you've got, condensed ownership. He's one of these guys, if you do get one of those touchdowns, because obviously it pulls from Mahomes and it pulls from Kelsey, and it pulls from McKinnon, obviously. There is a lot. He's a huge leverage play for sure.
For sure. Yeah. I think that's going to be interesting. And is McKinnon almost getting the treatment, when we have like a tight end like George Kittle, and sometimes it's like, well, they need the help on the offensive line and he's staying in blocking and they're not using him as a pass catcher. Is that essentially what's happening with McKinnon, where it's like he's such a good pass protector that they're not even asking him to leak out into the flat and they're saying, hey, just sit here on Mahomes' hip and protect him?
He still had a good amount of pass routes in the second half of that game per drop back, but they obviously, he didn't get targeted. So it's definitely kind of a red flag. I definitely believe he'll get a target, but he's also another one of these guys. This is what's so frustrating about the Chiefs. He's also one of these guys, like we know what we have in Jerick McKinnon, right? Like he's probably not going to push more than like a dozen touches, and he could maybe get there too, because he just carried the ball more and maybe that's going to be a larger role. But he's another one of these guys, like he needs a touchdown, right? Like he has to get a touchdown based on his usage. And that's what makes the Chiefs so damn maddening, right? Like, because we have to try to follow the touchdowns on this team. And it's so variant week to week. And like I said about that touchdown baton, how it's kind of oscillated between a few guys this season outside of Kelsey. They're really a hard team to project.
Yeah. Is there anything to see here with P. Ryan? You see him kind of popping in this sim leverage. He's been involved, had a role in a lot of different game scripts. Mixon, obviously going to be very popular. How do you think of P. Ryan in the context of this slate?
I think people are going to overextend on him, but I mean, obviously the salary makes it easy to just say like, all right, I'm going to plug him in. Here's the thing about P. Ryan is he's so sensitive to certain game conditions. So he's run more pass routes than Joe Mixon the past 2 weeks, but he has just 2 receptions outside of the 2-minute warning of each half. So like you need the Bengals to have the football in those situations, right? Like what happens if the Bengals just don't have a 2-minute drill, right? Like then he's not in the game. So, or if you're not in a scenario where the fourth quarter where like the Bengals are chasing 10 points, right? Something like that for him to get in these full passing situations. So I think it's people might look at like the box scores from the last 2 weeks and like him definitely scoring a touchdown in the AFC Championship game last week on that screen pass, where the 41-yard screen pass where he was almost relatively untouched, and maybe try to bite off a little bit more than they can chew on him. But I mean, he is affordable. I don't want to push back on anyone's like kind of punt play, but what's he looking at? He's only projecting for like 10% ownership, so I can't even push back on it. Actually, I thought it was going to be way higher.
The only thing I will say, I did just see across Eli Mitchell not practicing again today. So if people, Mitchell and P. Ryan are definitely the two of the sexy, kind of punt play running backs. I wonder if Mitchell is trending in the wrong direction or this Q tag lingers, maybe a little bit more gets funneled to P Ryan, and maybe it does end up just being too cute. It's like on this kind of slate, I'd almost rather take my dart throws at wide receiver and not necessarily mess so much with the P Ryan thing.
Yeah, and I'm always one of those same things. If I'm going to throw a dart, it's going to be in a wide receiver because you're talking about 1 to 2 plays where like that, like 12 to 15 points could be like a huge difference. Whereas to get to 12 to 15 points out of Samaje Perine, like you have to have a touchdown, right? That's necessarily like if you play like a Quez Watkins, you might not have him to get a touchdown to actually kind of be like worthwhile for salary. But Perine, for him to hit value, or like an Elijah Mitchell or Jordan Mason or Kenneth Gainwell, like last week, like those guys, you have to get a touchdown from those guys. But at receiver, that's not the case.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you on that. And especially when you go look through that list of wide receivers that we had pulled up earlier. I mean, your Jawan Jennings and Quez Watkins, like those guys can hit on a big play on one pass, like you said. Let's pivot
like
over
a 4 for 45 or like a 4 for 60, even without a touchdown is going to get you there.
For sure. Let's talk Eagles and Niners here. I mean, macro bird's eye level. Is this the end of the Brock Purdy feel good story, or is he just this magical thing that cannot be stopped?
I mean, it's like more of mixed feelings. I mean, he was more or less fine last week, but he played his first kind of real defense, and as you see, as a byproduct of facing kind of like that first real defense, and I think the Eagles are a better defense than the Cowboys too, especially the Cowboys defense to close the year. They averaged their fewest yards per play if any game Brock Purdy started by far. They've had just 3 games this season with fewer yards per play than what they had against the Cowboys. Of the 4 teams that won last week, the 49ers had the fewest yards per play, the lowest third down conversion rate, the lowest red zone conversion rate. The Cowboys pressured him on 49% of his dropbacks, and he just threw for 4.6 yards per pass attempt under pressure in that game. The difference between the Cowboys and the Eagles, who are second in the NFL in pressure rate, is the Cowboys are really bad at turning their pressures into negative plays. They are first in the NFL in pressure rate, but they're 15th in sacks per pressure rate. And they didn't get a lot of turnovers per pressure. The Eagles are second in the NFL in pressure rate, but they're number 1 in the NFL in turning pressures into sacks. And they're number 1 in the NFL in turning pressures into takeaways. So that is kind of where we're looking at, because Purdy had a couple opportunities there to make some negative plays and the Cowboys didn't capitalize. If those turn into negative plays in this game, it's going to be hard for the 49ers, because this is a game I see a lot like last week's game, where this is probably a touchdown premium game. Like, if one of these offenses can score 3 touchdowns, that probably wins them the game for sure, right? Like this might be a 1 to 2 touchdown game for each team, because both these defenses are so good, and both of these teams, when they've had to punch up offensively against good defenses, their productions come down, and neither of these teams have really played a lot of really good teams over the course of the season. But in their small sample of facing good defenses, they have not been as efficient. And we saw that with the 49ers last week. And this is one where I could see it really being kind of more of like a touchdown premium type outcome.
So can you tell yourself a story, a galaxy brain story from a DFS perspective, where Brock Purdy, who's going to be the lowest owned of these 4 quarterbacks, extremely cheap, you basically be able to play whatever else you want around him? Are there paths to him being the optimal quarterback here, or is that a thin story for you to tell yourself?
It's thin, but there are some kind of metrics you can get there on. Obviously, if he is kept clean, that's a thing. Like the protection stuff is real with Purdy. And obviously, protection is real with any quarterback, but especially a 7th-round rookie quarterback. But when he's been kept clean, and you saw last week against the Cowboys, he was 15 to 17 when kept clean passing. Only Patrick Mahomes has a higher pass rating from a clean pocket than Brock Purdy. He has the highest touchdown rate for a clean pocket. He's 3rd in yards per pass attempt. And the other element in this game is that both of these defenses, although they're both good, they kind of have one area where you want to call it a weakness, but they're more vulnerable than where they have been. And it's inverse. The Eagles are more vulnerable on the interior. And one of the things the Eagles like to do is they like to play, a sub package. They like to get in the extra DB and these extra safeties, because they have a guy that's versatile like Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, and get these guys on the field. But the 49ers are going to put them in a different position this week, because the 49ers play a fullback almost every play, Kyle Juszczyk. And the 49ers play a lot of 21 personnel. No team has faced fewer 21 personnel in the NFL this season than the Eagles. They faced the lowest amount of snaps in the NFL. So they're going to have probably an extra linebacker on the field than they haven't had. So there might be some middle of the field stuff that is inherently more open than usual against the Eagles, just because they're going to have to put different personnel on the field to combat the personnel the 49ers are putting on the field. So it's thin, like, because if you fall behind here, like the outcome for the 49ers that you don't want to see is you need Purdy to pass your way out of this game. Like when the Eagles know you have to pass, right? And you lose that versatility. That's probably the thinnest outcome for the 49ers to have success. Like they need neutral game script. They need to be able to stay in the play action game. They need to keep those linebackers on the field for the Eagles and make them pass protect or make them pass cover instead of come rush the passer. It's thin. That's like the air. That's what you need to run. That's the run out you need for Purdy, though. But the Eagles have allowed what, more than 15 passing points to one quarterback all season long.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing that I had stuck in my head watching that game last week was, man, Purdy had some clean pockets, some just sitting back there, no one around. It's like even Brock Purdy, if you give him 10 seconds back there, one of his playmakers will get open. And can he get those clean pockets against the Eagles? I don't know.
Yeah, and listen, Kyle Shanahan's taken this thing. He's shown us the last 3 years, like how good this scheme is. And this is what's funny about like Purdy being the long-term starter. Like this is still all like scheme stuff. And this is why they drafted a guy like Trey Lance in the first place. And not to defend Trey Lance and say he should be the starter, but like there's an unknown element of how good the 49ers can actually still be with elevated quarterback play.
I mean, just do the thought of it. Forget even Trey Lance. Put Jalen Hurts on this Eagles or on this Niners team and tell me what you're looking at.
I mean, well, it was last week when you saw a lot of people, I think, tweet the graphic where it was like the tail of the tape and it was Brock Purdy versus Dak Prescott, right? Like it was like whatever. I forget, it was ESPN or whatever. It's like, dude, if you put Dak Prescott on the 49ers, like this team would be like a clear boat race to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it is. It is nuts. Speaking of the weapons, I don't know how much there is to discuss with CMC. Obviously going to be even more of a smash if Eli Mitchell isn't getting a full workload. But how do you think about these pass catchers? Because it does seem like they've been rotating through a hero 2 weeks ago, Deebo Samuel, last week, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk still very much in the mix, and Brock Purdy will even look Juwan Jennings' way. So what do you think, or how do you kind of break ties between all of these various pass catchers who are priced pretty similar?
Yeah, I mean, DraftKings leaving. I don't think they've changed Deebo Samuel's price. It feels like since like week 8. Like, come on, guys. Like, there's no way on a slate like this Deebo Samuel should be sub 6K, right? Like, no. It's like they're almost telling us like we have to play him. And now like you want to galaxy brain yourself into like, well, do we have to fade him at 5,700? Like, is it the only way? Because he's just going to get so much inherent rostership at that price point. And then when he's going to be rostered because he's their best player. I mean, with Brock Purdy under center, Deebo Samuel has accounted for a team high 25% of his targets per route run. When they've been on the field together, he has a 30% team target share. The next closest player is at 18.4%. It's almost like the chase stuff that we talked about. And his depth of target is like a running back. He's averaging 5.5 air yards per target from Brock Purdy. 32% of his targets are behind the line of scrimmage. For some context, from Brock Purdy, Christian McCaffrey, 36% of his targets are behind the line of scrimmage. So like even when you look at like its matchment, like the Eagles are really good against wide receivers, right? Like they've got really good cornerbacks. Vontae Maddox looks like he's going to play in this game, so that even beefs up their slot and their interior production. But Deebo is a one-of-one player at wide receiver. He's going to get the ball behind the line of scrimmage. You can't defend that with like cornerback play. So it's hard to say like he's not the favorite here, especially in like a game like this, because Ayuk doesn't have that out. I mean, this guy's running 82% of his routes on the outside. James Bradbury, Darius Slade, these guys are out there, man. I mean, the Eagles against opposing boundary receivers, a lot of league low, 55% catch rate, 6.8 yards per target. That's 4th in the NFL. And with Deebo in the lineup, with Purdy in the game, I mean, Ayuk is just getting targeted on 15.4% of his routes now. He's averages 1 yard per route run with Deebo on the field. We need to free this man from this team. But this is the 49ers in a nutshell. This is why we talk about them needing elevated quarterback play, is because they don't have enough volume for these guys with a guy like Brock Purdy in the game. Like Ayuk has to run so pure with the targets he gets, and that makes it really hard to play. Like even with a touchdown, he might not get there because he might only have 40 yards or 50 yards to go with that touchdown. And at his rostership, like, are you even really getting enough squeeze there?
I know. And it's so tough too, because Deebo, he is going to be very popular. He's showing up in optimals. He's a really comfy click regardless of the game script, right? Like you can tell yourself 49ers smash. Okay. Deebo's a big part of that. You can tell yourself Eagles smash, and Deebo still can easily be involved in so many ways. So I get why people gravitate to him.
And if Mitchell's out.
And if Mitchell's out.
And if Mitchell is like really hurt, like who does that help? That'd be easy people will say like Jordan Mason, but dude, Debo's going to be the RB2.
Yeah. Right. That's a good point too. Yeah, his projection will probably even get boosted more. I think the most interesting one, and I don't have George Kittle up here on the screen right now, but comparing George Kittle to Ayuk from an ownership standpoint, Kittle is what, 800 more, but his ceiling projection is the same, and he's coming in at half of the ownership of Brandon Ayuk. To me, that feels like the exploitable thing. Like, if people are actually playing this much Brandon Ayuk, just play double flex George Kittle or play George Kittle instead.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the unique way if you try to get like on the 49ers ownership. Like if you play Debo, you might want to do a double with Kittle, and have that be the kind of to combat. And then you got obviously the leverage against Kelsey, right? Like so, like and Dallas Goedert too as well, who's really priced down on DraftKings at 40. Like his salary is also just going to make people click the button, right? Because you can play Chase plus AJ Brown or Chase plus Christian McCaffrey and do some things with Dallas Goedert. But I mean, playing tight ends against the 49ers is a tough life. I can tell you that. Those linebackers, they cover a lot of space. They don't give up a lot of production to tight ends. So this might not be the run back and Chase Goddard at that price. So you're getting kind of double leverage because he's in this purgatory. George Kittle, I mean, is in this purgatory where like you don't pay up for Kelsey, but you also don't pay down for Goddard. And that's probably impacting his projected ownership for sure, because he's just priced in between those guys.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I can pull up let me pull up the tight ends here real quick. And then I want to check in about the Eagles pass catchers. But yeah, you see Travis Kelce here. Looks like about half the field's going to play him. Goddard, just because he's so egregiously priced down there at 4,100. Yep. He's also going to be very popular. And then it looks like Kittle and Hurst are going to come in a little below. And then when you actually think about talent profiles, what these guys can do after the catch, I mean, Kittle starts to look like the best tight end play on the slate to me.
Yeah, I think so too, man. I think he's the way to go. And, I just have a hard time believing that the Bengals and Lou Anarumo are going to line up in this game and say, it'll be cool if Travis Kelce has 50% of the team targets like he had last week, right? Like, yeah. And I mean, I understand like the Jaguars too inherently knew hey, we don't want Travis Kelce to beat us. But like, I have a real hard time believing that the Bengals we're going to see 17 targets for Travis Kelce.
I know. I'm with you on that. Let's talk about the Eagles pass catchers, because I would say almost different from what we see playing out with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase in a true separation. Like the opposite is happening with Devonta Smith and AJ Brown, where Devonta Smith has closed that gap to where, I don't know, you almost flip a coin of who's the lead wide receiver on a given week. Are you there with Devonta Smith now?
Yeah, it's become very hard to diagnose. It's a very 1A, 1B, or just both 1B kind of situations. He's out-targeted, Devontae Smith, that is out-targeted A.J. Brown in 7 of the past 10 games. So it has been kind of his world. A.J. Brown's still, a little bit more efficient with his targets, and so is that big play. The cool thing is you can just play both. And from a top-down perspective, we've seen the Eagles really swerve into calling games based on their opponent, right? So you look at the 49ers, opponents have thrown the ball 62% of time against them. It's second highest rate in the league. Part of that is because they've just had to lead a lot, right? But part of that also is they are awesome against the run. They're number 2 in the NFL success rate against running back carries. The Eagles have played 6 games this season against top 10 teams in success rate against the run. And in those games, they've thrown the ball in 69% of their first half dropbacks. Against everyone else, their pass rate in the first half is just 60%. The closest comp we have to kind of the 49ers in terms of run D is the Titans, who are number 1. And the Eagles came out and threw the ball in 77% of their first half snaps in that game. Now, the catch here is that the 49ers are just a better pass defense than the Titans, or like a team like the Commanders. So expecting like a huge run out is probably still like a thinner play, like absolute smash ceiling games for these guys. But the 49ers have been really vulnerable to wide receivers, especially, you look at since week 11, they have allowed their 28th in catch rate to opposing wide receivers, 24th in yards per target to wide receivers, 29th in yards per game allowed to wide receivers, 23rd in touchdown rate allowed to wide receivers. The Eagles don't have the passing volume as other teams, but no team in the NFL has targeted their wide receivers more than the Philadelphia Eagles. When they throw the football, they've targeted their wide receivers on 69.5% of their throws. Yeah. Guess where the ball goes though? It's to those two guys. Those two guys account for 70% of basically the wide receiver targets. So like it could be one of these situations where just both guys are the play, right? Because the 49ers are worse on the outside. These guys don't really move to the slot, either one of them a lot. The targets are going to them. It's a situation where the Eagles aren't going to line up and run Miles Sanders. They're probably going to have more pass heavy script. So yeah, I think you could play both. And it looks like, unlike last week where people were like, it was a clear leverage play where you just played Devontae Smith because Arthur Juan was going to be higher owned. This week looks a lot tighter. So you're probably going to have to play doubles with them to be a little bit more unique. And if you're playing Hurts in general, you might even have to play a triple with him and just hope take a shot on a guy like a Quez Watkins and hope 1 or 2 targets are enough to get you there.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought him up because the chat has been talking about Quez Watkins and bringing up some points that I want to get your thoughts on. So Matt here says that Quez's snap count has decreased for 3 straight games.
Yep.
Could envision a scenario where the Eagles play a decent amount of Pascal and Stoll as extra help. Burt counters that he expects the Eagles to tailor their game plan to the Niners' weakness, which is the deep ball, better off spreading them out and gunning than going heavy. Do you have any thoughts on this Quez, Pascal, how you beat the Niners and who the dart throw is in the Eagles passing game?
Yeah, so I mean, my opinion on it is what the Eagles have given us throughout the course of the season is they are opponent sensitive. Like what their offensive game plan and their structure has been is based on kind of where the weakness of the opponent is. And their past 2 games have come against the New York Giants, who you want to attack their linebackers, you want to attack downhill running. And that's why I think we've seen Pascal play more snaps the past 2 weeks, because he's just a far better in the run game than Quez Watkins is. So I do think that we will see a little bit more if they have to open up and throw the ball. We're going to see a guy like Quez Watkins play a little bit more than he has the past 2 weeks. Now, he's still a guy he's a thin play on itself. Like the dude he hasn't had more than 20 yards in a game since like week 10, maybe. But where the 49ers are vulnerable is the vertical passing game that we talked about. He is number 1 on the Eagles in target rate on throws downfield. 20% of his targets on these throws 20 yards or further downfield. That's where the 49ers are 23rd in the NFL against completion rate wide receivers and 27th in touchdowns allowed to wide receivers. We saw, I mean, this is last year, it doesn't count, but Quez Watkins did kind of get over it. He had a 91-yard catch against the 49ers to kind of get there last year. No A.J. Brown in that game, obviously. Yeah. But I do think based on what the Eagles have shown us this year is they're geared up to their opponent, like how their opponent defends. And that's why I think we will see a little more Quez Watkins than we've seen in the last couple of weeks when they face the Giants, and you get Pascal involved in the run game a lot more than you can a guy like Quez Watkins.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. I wonder, I always, during the regular season, I start to say, who are the steam guys? Who's the sneaky GPP play that's no longer sneaky? If our Galaxy Brainers in the chat are any indicator, Quez might be our steam guy here as we head into Sunday.
But even on a slate like this, he's probably going to be 10%. Like,
yeah, true.
Just because inherent, it's like a extension of the showdown, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And also too, it's just tough. Like when you can play the best plays, it's like, oh, I'm going to not play Debo so I can play Quez Watkins. Like that's why Quez is still going to be relatively.
Yeah, like Trent Irwin's going to have 5% like rostership on the slate.
Let's wrap up talking about the running backs, and then we'll build a lineup here on DraftKings. We kind of touched on the Chiefs. We touched on P. Ryan a bit. How are you thinking about the Eagles running backs in this situation? Last week, they obviously did whatever they wanted. Kenneth Gainwell had the big game. Miles Sanders priced very affordable here as far as for a lead back, and yet the Niners have obviously been great against running backs.
Yeah, it definitely feels like the Tom Hardy that's bait, meme. Because you look at let's just remove the 49ers, who are awesome against the run. But again, those games that we talked about where the Eagles have been pass heavy against these good run defenses, in those 6 games that the Eagles have faced the top 10 run D, Miles Sanders in those games has rushed 85 times for 338 yards, 3.9 yards per carry. He has a game high 78 rushing yards in those games. He has 2 rushing touchdowns in those games. Just 2 running backs have rushed for more than 60 yards this season against the 49ers, the high of 69, not nice 69 yards. One running back has had 100 yards against the 49ers this season, and he's on their team right now. Like that's wild. Ridiculous. Like it's crazy. And Sanders is so touchdown dependent himself. I mean, on DraftKings full PPR site, he's averaging 20.3 PPR points per game in his games with a touchdown, 6.3 PPR points per game in his weeks without a touchdown. He's a high of 22 receiving yards in a game. Even with a touchdown, Miles Sanders might not get you there. That's like that kind of game. for him. And then I don't know what you do with the other guys, right? Like they're not playing the Giants, so Boston Scott probably won't score. And basically, I don't know if you listen to the Kelsey podcast. Jason Kelsey kind of like almost admitted that they look like coaches look at that stuff, and like Nick Sirianni like had a play to get Boston Scott to their touchdown last week.
I believe it, man.
Yeah,
they get caught up in that stuff too.
Yeah, and then Kenneth Gainwell had all his production in the fourth quarter of that game. He had 90 yards rushing and a touchdown in the fourth quarter against the Giants. Hard to really say, like, 'cause you would say, like, all right, maybe his pass catching is an out here against the 49ers, but the 49ers linebackers are so damn good in coverage, and they cover so much grass that they just don't give up a lot of receiving production to receivers either. So really hard, I think, for the Eagles to say, like, any of these guys really have any type of ceiling. Especially if you want to get cute and even say like Gainwell versus Pirine, right?
Right.
It's very hard to really say like there's any upside there.
So if I took McCaffrey and Mixon off the board and I said, what's your favorite running back play, ownership, price, ceiling, all adjusted just on the slate, like where do you gravitate to? Because it is really gross after CMC and Mixon.
Yeah, I think Mixon's the clear like top play because he's leverage on McCaffrey and he's leverage on all the Bengals passing stuff.
Yeah.
Like I think he's the guy, even he'll probably be 50% rostered, but I think he's a guy you maybe go 65% or 70% on. You just go the extra mile on him because of how much leverage he carries. And you can still fit him in onslaughts, like Bengals onslaughts. So to me, he's probably the best play for sure from a top-down perspective. And then if you're talking about like after the top two, it's very rough, man. It is very rough. I would say Pacheco would be my next guy. Would be the next.
I think I'm with you on that. If these ownership percentages hold true and he's half of McKinnon, Pacheco looks like the best to me. And there's nothing super intimidating about the Bengals run D, is there?
I mean, they've been really good, especially with DJ Reader on the field. They've been really good. They are a little bit worse against backs out of the backfield. But the interesting thing about the Bengals is like you can kind of pick out parts. Like they're not really like they're a good defense top down, but like what makes them so good is they just do a lot of things. Like, right. Like they don't have like an area where they're dominant. Like they're an awesome pass rushing team. Or like they're awesome against tight ends. They're awesome they just do a lot of things well. And that's what makes them it's made them such a hard matchup for the Chiefs in particular is they just give you a lot of looks, man. Like they'll play a game where they let a running back beat them. They'll play a game where they let like a wide receiver beat them. But like, I have a hard time believing that the Bengals are coming into this game and they're going to let Travis Kelce beat them.
Yeah. Yep. And so then we get to guess which wide receiver is it?
I feel like that's the key though too. Like we're going to look back on the winners here of this weekend, especially large field stuff, and say, oh, Juju had 2 touchdowns or had 80 yards at a touchdown and he was the play, or like MVS like caught a bomb, or what Justin Watson did something. Like I feel like when we look back on it, but I don't know how you land on any of those guys other than just saying, here we go.
Sky Moore breakout game. Can we go there?
Yeah. I don't think the line exists for the Super Bowl. Usually posts these props, but like number of non-quarterbacks to have a carry or something. Because I would imagine the Chiefs wide receivers have multiple carries in this game.
Yeah, I like that. I like that call for sure, especially if Hardman's active. He seems like a prime candidate for that. All right, let's build a lineup. That's how we wrap up these shows. Rich, I am, of course, entering us into the Millie so that when we ship this, you and I will each be a quarter of the way to the Kerrane, which is what we're all trying to do in life, is chip away at Kerrane's lead.
Yeah. Props to Kerrane. I think he's like, I don't even know where. He's like some kind of tour of Southeast Asia or something right now. Good for him.
Yeah, scuba diving. He claims that this trip was planned before he won the $2 million.
Oh, sure it was.
We know the truth. Yeah, we know the truth.
It was.
The rest of us have to slum it back here and get out of this town building, super contrarian DFS lineups. But what do you want to kick us off with here? You can do a stack. You don't have to be polite. You got a few guys you want to jam in. Let's let it rip.
Let's see. I think let's do like a Hurts build with Mixon then.
Yeah.
Just as it's the Millie. I think if you're playing small field stuff, or if you're, for whatever reason if for some reason you're playing cash lineups on this slate, you want to go the Burrow route. But
what do you think about the Hurts triple, but with Quez and fading Goddard?
Yeah, I don't want to play Goddard. Goddard's the dude I don't want to play.
Okay, we're in lockstep there. And then do we play Kittle then as our tight end?
We play Kittle as the tight end.
So this still leaves us. Let's figure out well, we don't necessarily have to figure out defense, but I assume we'd probably want to go with, I guess you could make a case for any defense other than San Fran.
And we can't play the Eagles because we have 4 Eagles, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think if we are playing just like an Eagles romp, a pick six could still get us there, and it's probably unique. Let's come back to defense, actually. Let's think about our second running back play. That's the real hinge point here. Do we go to our guy Pacheco we were talking about?
Yeah, can we play Pacheco? I think so.
I think
we could play
definitely
Pacheco.
And then this, who do we want to be if we want to go Cincy KC? I'm just going to put in a placeholder defense. Let's just say we did rip in Eagles and just play this. That gives us 6,100.
Well, we can't, right? Because we'll have too many Eagles.
Does it? It shouldn't. No, we should be good, right?
Oh, I thought that, is it still a limited 4? I didn't know if there's a limit.
No, we can go more. I think you just have to play one player, not from one unique player. Yeah. But we can do various combos.
Salary then, right?
Yeah. If you go down to, let's say you played Bengals D at 2,300, that's still, yeah. So this, no matter what we do at defense, we can't get up to Chase unless we make a tweak elsewhere.
No, that's a bummer.
Yeah. Like if you go Chase, and let's see, if you did Chase Bengals, you're still even off of like the Gainwell P Ryan. So Chase is going to be a tough fit.
Yeah. So we can't even get to him. We could do Higgins Boyd, but that kind of offsets what we're doing without no Joe Burrow.
Right.
So we probably have to pick a Chief Jamoke, right? Like, do we play Juju?
And just leave some salary on the table.
Yeah, we play Juju and we just hopefully he's the one you need, the guy you need, right?
But if in this one, would you rather play Chiefs defense, or do you like the idea
Oh, that's true, because we aren't playing Burrow.
We could probably go Chiefs defense here and play. I mean, I have a feeling this is this feels like a unique construction to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess it's just picking our poison. Which defense do we want going against which one running back? Do we want Chiefs defense against Mixon or Bengals defense against Pacheco?
I mean, I feel like Chiefs is the move because we don't have Burrow or any of the pass catchers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The only thing would be, is Mixon more correlated to Bengals controlling the game, being up more so than like Pacheco? Like if the Bengals get out to say a 14-0 lead, how much Pacheco do you think we're seeing?
0. None.
I say we go Bengals D. I think it correlates slightly better.
All right. Perfect.
Okay.
And then this is the lineup, right? Like if Quez doesn't hit at 1:00, you've got 1,900 now to reconfigure your late swapping here to where you would go down from like Pacheco to like a P Ryan and then go up. You could probably get to Chase then, right?
Yeah, I think we could. We would, when I try, when I'm deep in the lab, trying to salvage min caches on Sunday evening, I will certainly consider that.
Yeah, and that game being the late game, that's probably your late swap's going to be anyways. Yeah. Hey, whatever. Listen, it's a millie lineup.
It can't win a millie without it being somewhat gross. That's what I've learned in life. Rich, I know you did a podcast with Davis. You got a bunch of stuff out on Sharp Football. Where can people get the rest of your thoughts on this weekend's slate?
Yeah. Sharp Football Analysis. I go and I wrote up all these games in detail. So a lot of those nuggets I rip off, like I've already pulled and written up for all the player coverage. One more game to write up this year and our journey will be over. But, yeah, you can check that Sharp Football Analysis. I was on Davis' podcast. I do a podcast with Dan Pizzuta that's a real football podcast. But yeah, it's still just me talking about fantasy stuff still. But we do more of like an angle of like breaking down the game, which is what we do anyways as fantasy analysts. But
yeah,
hey, whatever.
We just get a bad rap, That's
but yeah, check that stuff out. Enjoy it, man. Just enjoy these games. It's our kind of last like weekend because you're going to be inundated by the time we get to the Super Bowl. You're going to be tired of hearing about that game.
Oh, for sure. I know, because I'll have 2 weeks of radio shows on XM leading up to it. I'm like, I'm going to have to come up with some unique takes for that game, or we're going to just have to start talking about like how long Rihanna's halftime show is going to be. But But I appreciate you guys hanging out in the chat. Always a good time talking football with you guys. If you're in the Discord, I'll post some of the charts I was sharing earlier with the optimals and some of those projections. I will share those in the Hand Builders and Opto Bros Discord. Hope you guys all have a great weekend. Maybe I'll fire up a Monday recap stream just to check in with everyone. But otherwise, have a great weekend, and we will see you guys next week. For Rich, I'm Pete. Peace.
Thank you.